Jerry Moss, formerly co-founder, I guess, or current co-founder of what was A&M Records, and it's still going. So it basically started with me sort of wanting to find some niche in the entertainment business. Like a lot of guys that went to college on the East Coast, I did a lot of waiting on tables during the summertime at some of these resorts. And I was lucky enough to always pull the entertainer's table. And, I just felt they were having a lot of fun, They worked hard, they did what they were supposed to do, but between each other, there was a camaraderie and there was fun, a lot of laughter. And I said to myself, I want to be part of this somehow, some sort of a creative process that gives me a chance to work with these kinds of people, And I thought I was going to end up in television, which at that time was a sort of a, late 50s, kind of an infant sort of industry. I sort of liked music in those days, but mostly sort of jazz, sort of Dave Brubeck, kind of stuff. Paul Desmond, of course. And then when I was about 22 years old, a friend of mine was getting married. Good friend. I'd grown up with the guy, and there was a so-called older man at the ceremonies. He was like 37 or something, 35. And he was a music publisher, record guy. And he was recently divorced and squiring the maid of honor, so to speak. And the activities put us together for a couple of days, the rehearsal dinner and all this kind of thing. And I really liked this guy. He was funny, he was interesting, and we had some fun just conversing, And at the wedding, because we sort of knew the groom so well, we knew his family, so I was dancing with the aunts and a couple of the uncles, and we were just reading telegrams, and came back to our table after some of these activities, and Marvin, his name was Marvin Kane, he said to me, he says, "You'll be a great music man." I said, "What does that mean?" And he says, "Well, that means we'd probably start you off at about $100 a week, and inside of a year and a half, you'd be making $300." Now, this was 1958, and $100 a week was a lot of money in those days, and I just kept thinking, $100 a week, wow, I said, "But I'm a little drunk right now, how do I put this in a perspective, And he said, "Well, call me, and we'll talk about it." And I did call him the next day, and I said, "Look, I'm supposed to go in the Army in about 6 weeks. What if at that time I was out of college, and I was sort of managing a theater for ABC, a radio theater, sort of like a head page situation, But I was just marking time until I was supposed to go into the Army for 6 months, and which was what the programs they had in those days. And I said, "Wonder if I work for you for 6 weeks, and you see if I like you, you like me, this kind of thing." And he says, No, call me, just keep in touch with me and call me when you get out of the Army." Okay, so I kind of thought about it, and he kind of defined the job, which was going around to radio stations and getting your records played and doing that kind of thing, and I had not even an understanding of what that really was, But for $100 a week, I thought I could do anything, Anyway, I went in the Army. I was stationed at Fort Dix for a while, and then I went down to Fort Jackson, South Carolina. All this time, I was sending Marvin notes and calling him, and never got a response, nothing, And then I got out in August of 58. I called him, "Marvin, I'm back, let's go, let's see what's up," nothing, nothing. So I went back to work, make some money. I went back waiting on tables for a while, and finally, after being persistent, in November of 1958, I started at A&M, at co-ed records for $75 a week, I should mention. So, and my job, the first day I was there, it was an election day, was to go to Philadelphia and see who was playing our record, you know. So I went to Philadelphia, introduced myself to people. Everybody said, "Where's your distributor?" I didn't know that distributors usually accompanied, you know, the manufacturer's reps on the road, but Marvin didn't tell me to call anybody. He just told me to go to these radio stations, talk to these people, and see what's up. And it was, you know, I was kind of a shy person to begin with, and right away I didn't fit in with this job. It didn't work for me, you know. Nobody really was interested in me. I mean, a couple of people were polite and courteous, you know. A couple of people had a joke or two, and, you know, a lot of people said, "Tell Marvin I'm playing the record," you know. And that was all they had to hear. And one guy invited me to, you know, sit in on his broadcast, which I thought was about the most interesting part of the day, and he was the 8 to 12 man. And he was a really nice guy, and I sat and watched a disc jockey actually doing some work, and he was a terrific guy at the Philadelphia radio station, and he actually dropped me off at the train station to go back to New York that night. And I said, "Man, it's beautiful what you did." And he says, "Listen, just tell Marvin we got along, and maybe there'll be a check in it someday for me, you know." And I really wasn't even putting that together, you know. So I got back, and I really immediately figured out that obviously we were taking care of some of these people, you know, and some of the people we weren't, you know. But I continued to promote records and try to learn as much as I could about the business, because it did have some quirks about it that I liked a lot, and one of which was I liked the record I was working on, you know. And I quickly worked out with Marvin that I didn't need to, you know, work with people that were being taken care of. Let me see how good I am. Let me work with people that we weren't taking care of. Let's see what I could do, you know. Anyway, we kept going. I kept seeing cities I'd never seen before. I went to Cleveland. I went to Pittsburgh. I went to St. Louis, Atlanta, Boston, Washington, D.C. Amazing, you know, just incredible. Going to hotels for the first time in my life as a customer, ordering room service, you know, on occasion, and taking people out to dinner on an expense account, however, which I had to obviously pay strict attention to. And at the same time, I was thinking maybe I was trying to make a long story short. I was trying to maybe get into this commercial film business as well, and cultivating somebody I knew to try to connect me with that. And I remember being in Cleveland and celebrating the success of our record, which I'll tell you the name of right now. And that record was 16 Candles by the Crests, which eventually went to number 2 or number 1 in the country. And everybody was having a good time and patting me on the back like I'd done something amazing, you know. And I for some reason, I called my mom, you know, and I just said, "How's she doing? What's up?" And she says, "Oh, that girl from the film company called, and that job you wanted, that production assistant gig, if you want it, you know, you could come in tomorrow and get it, you know." And I said, "Well, I think I'll be here tonight, and I'm coming in tomorrow, and I'll call her, you know." Of course, I've decided I was going to give the record business another chance, you know. And so I did, and I stuck around with Co-Ed Records for about 1.5 years. And I learned a lot about the business. I got to meet a lot of its great characters. I got to appreciate a lot of the great disc jockeys at that time, and how talented they were and how interesting they were, and what the music scene was, you know, at that time. So that's how I just ended up in the game. It was almost purely for the money, you know. And I found myself enjoying it enough to want to stay in it for at least the first 1.5 years. My strength was that I seemed to be able to get along with people fairly well. I realized who I was going to come off as was going to be as a truthful person, because I realized that radio stations needed to know what was really going on with a particular record. They were competing with other radio stations, and I wasn't going to hype them. I was going to talk about my record in different ways that wouldn't in any way constitute as being untruthful. So I wanted to be a person that could be trusted. That was very important. And I think I succeeded in that way, because I got along with some guys. The disc jockeys became my friends. We went out, we did stuff. We had a nice time. And I got to know the younger, up and coming guys, and it was just a lot of fun. The frustrating part to me was that in a year and a half I was making about $140 a week by this time. I hate to put everything in terms of money, but I didn't have any, so it was important. And at that point, the top promotion man in the country for RCA, let's say, was a guy that was about 45 years old that was making $175 a week. And I said to myself, well, if this is what I have to look forward to, this is not amazing. I have to start thinking outside of this box, and how am I going to step it up and see what else I can do. And at that point, after a year and a half, the music was sort of interesting, but it wasn't. This was like 1960, and it wasn't quite touching me. I still was. The records we were putting out by the Crest and the Rivieras and Adam Wade and people like that were interesting and hit records, let's say. Working with the Crest was fun, but it wasn't music that was sort of touching me, so to speak. And so in 1960 is when I kind of decided to take a shot and go to California, which was part of my overall dream. When I got to California, I did go to that interview at the William Morris office, and they said I had to go in the mailroom. The mailroom only paid, ridiculous, $35 a week, and I mean, I couldn't afford it. I just couldn't live on it, so I couldn't take the job. And then my friend from TV, he was on the unemployment line because there was an actors' strike, and my money was starting to run out. What little bit I had, and I was living with my aunt out here at the time, great lady, who was sort of my beacon in my family. She was just an incredible woman. And I'd heard that the top independent promotion man in town had lost 2 East Coast accounts. And I happen to know both of those people, those accounts. And I mean, to get back into it, I got to know some record people on the West Coast, and I called those accounts and I got them. So all of a sudden I was in business as a so-called independent promotion man. And this was exciting from 2 points of view. Number one, I was working again. That was good. I was making some money. But number two, I was in business for myself, which was a very unique experience, and something I hadn't really planned on at all. And I absolutely loved it. Jerry Moss Productions Unlimited as a name. So working in business for myself, I started thinking, maybe I should sometimes accept copyrights in lieu of promotion fees, or, so I started a little publishing company. Not that it meant anything, but just to know it, just to learn something about it. So this was the West Coast. This was a different feel. I started feeling I was making some friends. I started making friends of producers, people that were actually making the records. And that's how I met Herb Alpert. From 1960, 61, I started to experiment with producing some records with different partners. Sometimes, in those days, you could make a record for about $200 or $300, and then if it was any good, get it played on a couple of stations, get a little bit of reaction, and perhaps. There were so many labels in those days to deal with. There was Chess Records, there was obviously Atlantic, but there was Dot Records. There was so many West Coast labels, like Keen Records, and people that had real businesses, you know. And they would buy the record maybe for $7.50 and give you a couple of points as a producer. So we made a few deals like that, and it was a one-off. It was a one-record thing, and then move on and see what happened. None of them were amazingly successful, but again, I was learning. You know, I was trying to do stuff, and in the meantime, I met Herbie, and we just got to be sort of friends. I loved the way he played trumpet, number one. So, you know, we'd go out sometimes, and there were a bunch of piano bars on La Cienega Boulevard in those days. We'd sit in, and he'd, you know, do some solo work or play with the piano player, and, you know, just do some. And he was just amazing. He'd always get a reaction, and it was just fun to be with him. We were, like I say, good friends. He was a record producer. He was an arranger. He was a totally musician. And we listened to records together into the night, you know, and which record was doing good, which record that I was promoting wasn't doing good. By this time, I started picking up a lot of accounts, and I represented a lot of people, and I was starting to make a pretty good wage as an independent promotion person, you know. I think in 1961, that year, I must have earned about 30 grand, you know. So the business was good, you know. He had been partners with Lou Alpert, Lou Adler, excuse me, Lou, and they had produced Jan and Dean together. And Herbie at the time was still is a very attractive guy, and everybody said, why don't you try being an actor? You know, at that time, attractive people were sort of looked upon with, you know, some degree of professional skill in what sense, and he tried. So they broke up the partnership. You know, Lou, the way they broke up their partnership was that, you know, Lou got Jan and Dean, and Herb got the 2-track Ampex tape recorder. And that's what he ended up with. So he did some experimenting on that, because that was an interesting piece of equipment. And he started producing his own records using his son's name, Dory Alpert, as a vocalist, and putting out certain records. And it just coincidentally, at the same time, I was making a record with an actor friend of mine, and using Herbie as a trumpet solo in the middle of the record. And both of these records ended up costing about $400 or something, $400 to make, you know, each of them, strangely enough. RCA had let Dory Alpert go, you know, and we were sitting on the beach one day, and just said, what if, you know, look, why don't we just put these on the same label, you know, let's each put $100 in a checking account to produce enough records for us to get a reaction, and let's see what happens. Let's take it from there, you know. So in I would say summer of '62, we put out a song called "Tell It to the Birds" by Dory Alpert on Carnival Records, and it started to get some interest. And we got it, you know, played on the local radio stations, and we sold maybe 6,000-7,000 records locally of "Tell It to the Birds," to the point where Dot Records, in the person of Wink Martindale, who was then an A&R man for Dot Records, picked it up. Very funny deal for the world outside of L.A., you know. For $750, as I remember, that was the price we got, and went on to promote the record around the rest of the world, so to speak, you know. And so all of a sudden, we now had $2,000 or $3,000 in our checking account. You know, we actually made a little money because we were still selling records through the local distributor on Carnival, and we had sold the record and got a cash thing. The record I made which was called Love Is Back in Style, didn't work. Nobody seemed to like it very much, and I just wasn't getting a buzz at all on that record. It was a nice record, but it just didn't go over. So here we were. We had a couple of $1,000. We had Carnival Records, and we had more than we started with. So what was our next project? I think we made a record for somebody as producers, and we got another $500 to do that. And anyway, we started just thinking about what was happening. We liked the name Carnival, but we noticed that a couple of other people had the name, and so we were never sure what to do next. And then we were sitting around one night, and the other thing that Herbie and I used to do a lot in those days was go to the bullfights in Tijuana. We went to them a lot. For me, it was a thrill because I was a big fan of Hemingway, and a couple of years earlier, he had written about the mano a mano, the bullfights between Dominguin and God, the other great guy. I forget his last. It was Dominguin's. I'll remember the name at some point because he was just a great guy. I got to know him later, but and while we were making our little record company, there had been a hit called Mexico by Bob Moore, who was a bass player in Nashville, one of the great studio players. And I think Monument Records liked him so much they let him make an album. And he made music from all over the world. And so he made a record about Mexico, which is kind of a mariachi record. But because he had like different other sounds in the album, there was no follow-up. Never was a follow-up. Anyway, this all, was in my head, and one night Herbie came back with a song that he had just played a casual one night, meaning like either a wedding or a bar mitzvah with somebody, and the guy was Saul Lake, who was the keyboard player, and he had a tape of this record that, a song that Saul had written, an instrumental song. And he played it, and it was dee da dee da 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 dee da 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 dee da da, And he's playing it over and over again, and we're sitting and thinking about it, And I said, it sounds to me like a trumpet record, And then we thought, let's do like a bullfight thing. Let's and it, he said this and I said that, and before you knew it, out pops the Lonely Bull, And Herbie and we went down to the bull ring to record the sounds authentically, And he had gotten a great engineer. I think the guy's name was Ted Keep, I think his name was. Great engineer. And then we said, well, what kind of label we put it on? It's like the Carnival's gone, and we went through this thing about label names and all this, and finally we came up with, let's call it A&M. At least we had no idea how long this whole thing was going to last or what it was, but at least we felt something about this record. We just felt something about it. And at the same time, I was still doing independent promotion work. I was still working a lot of records. I still knew a lot of program people, and I had the program director at KYA, I remember, staying in my house, and she loved the record, just absolutely loved it, and she went up to San Francisco, put it on the radio, and went crazy up there, absolutely went crazy up there. So we really felt we had something, you could just feel it. I was starting to get calls from other record companies, people that knew it was my record, so to speak. I said, no, I'm not selling this record. We're gonna take this record. We're gonna keep it going, And then I sort of decided I better let everybody know this was our record because I don't want somebody to cover me. In other words, put out another version and say, I didn't know it was your record. I want you to know this is Herbie and my record. So anyway, then next came the point of how do we get the money to press up the record, And there was a guy named Nate Duroff, who for me was a great friend and great supporter, and he advanced me the $35,000 in credit to make up 350,000 records on the West Coast. And Herbie's family put up some collateral on the East Coast, and we got 350,000 records pressed on the East Coast. And we sold about 700,000 records, and it was amazing. And the record, I think, went eventually to number 6 and number 7 in the country. And that's the story of the Lonely Bull. At the time, I really felt, number one, Herbie was really special. First of all, as a person, and secondly, as a musician, as an artist. He was really definite, in how he thought and what he felt, how he felt about things. We were very simpatico on the business side, because he was enough of a producer and a record man himself to know what sort of had to be done, and understood the game very well because he and Lou had been successful in it, They had written some Sam Cooke songs, they had done some very nice work, so he was more understanding of where that side of the business was. I had absolutely nothing to lose outside of, like you say, maybe I wouldn't get a meal or something, but I wasn't married, The fact that I went from a pretty good income, when I gave up my independent promotion business, all Herbie and I took out of the business for at least 2 or 3 years was about $125 a week, just to pay rent and keep going, Herbie had a wife and a kid at that time, so for him it was maybe a little more difficult, But we realized we better keep the money together, Let's not get crazy and spend money. Let's just, because we're not going to have a hit every time. We realized that right away, And as it turned out, we didn't have another top 10 record for 3 years. 3 years for a top 10 record. So I think what happened, we were operating literally from fall that year, from August of '62, in the back of Herbie's place. That was his garage. We literally worked out of his garage. He had a piano, the 2-track tape recorder, and I had a desk with a phone with 2 extensions, and that's where we operate out of. I kept the file on distributor orders. I kept, what we shipped to somebody, how we bill them, what we, because I knew the distributors well enough to ask them how they did this, And I sent out the bills, like my little homemade bills, and we got paid. Most of the time, we got paid. In January of '63, after we started putting together an album, first album, we hired a tremendous lady named Jolene Burton, and she became our head bookkeeper, head secretary, head person. She was the lady in the office, and she was incredibly gifted. She great bookkeeper, great resources, knew everybody in the business. We got her from Liberty Records, with great experience in the business. And we moved to 8255 Sunset Boulevard, and we had an office similar to almost what we have here, an anteroom, and then an office that Herbie and I shared, and then there was another room where there was a piano and a tape recorder, and that was sort of it, and that's how we operated for at least a couple of years. We had 3 guys named Kenny, Joe, and Larry, who sang very well together, and we called them the Kenjolaires. And then there was a couple other bands. We had a song called Guantanamera, was pretty good. That was our record for a while. There were different sort of chart records we made with different people. we picked up a record out of Canada called, well, the name of the group was the Canadian Sweethearts. Lucille Starr was the girl, and she had just the most incredible voice. And there was a song called, well, in French it's Quand le soleil dit bonjour aux montagnes, which is when the sun says good day to the mountains, you know. And in France, in Canada, it was huge, you know, just a huge hit. And we tried, you know, we sold a few records in America on it, and we put out their album, you know, so to speak, and worked that pretty good. And I thought this was going to get me a big hit in France, and of course they didn't like the Canadian French, you know. They just looked down their nose at it, you know. It's a different language, really, in a sense, you know, spoken differently in different ways in the two countries. But there, you know, we tried different things, you know, as I say, and tried to spread our business and promote our business, you know, and at the same time, you know, at the time we as an artist we had signed Waylon Jennings, you know. He was kind of a friend of mine named Don Bowman tipped me off to this great guy in Phoenix, and we invited him in, and he just knocked Herbie and I off our feet. He was absolutely brilliant. And we started making records with Waylon and making some headway. You know, I would say getting interest on radio stations, and I would say he would sing mostly folk songs or songs he wrote himself. Four Strong Winds, you remember that? Limelighter's song or something like that. And I remember whistling and doing hand claps on that record, you know. And Waylon was just the greatest guy in the world. And then one day he came into us and said, "Boys, you've been great to me." He says, "But I got the call every country boy dreams of, you know, got the call from RCA Nashville, you know. And you guys want to keep me? I'm with you, you know. But I just want to let you know, if you're tired of me, you know, I can go somewhere. You don't have to worry about me, you know." And you know, Herbie didn't want to let him go. Herbie said, "This guy's going to be a star. How can we just let him walk out?" You know. And finally, we talked it over and thought, well, you know, we're promoting Tijuana Brass. Let's focus on this thing and make sure we get the most we can out of this vision we have, you know. And so I went to Phoenix. I cut about 6 more tracks with Waylon, and we had an album that we put out called "Just to Satisfy You," which became a pretty big song for Waylon and his lifelong, you know, library. And we let him go. So we had different experiences with different people. Chris Montez, we recorded. Herbie made a record that was a pretty good hit. "The More I See You," chart record, enough to make an album with Chris. It sold a few records. I mean, all these things had something to do with keeping us going, keeping us charging ahead. And by the time we made our 3rd album with Herb Alpert and the Tijuana Brass, an album called "South of the Border," there was a real market for this record. And there were very few, at that time, independent companies selling albums. They were singles companies. And very, you know, I can maybe one hand the companies that were situated like us, making single records mostly, that were also selling albums. And maybe the Cap Records was maybe one of them. Cadence Records, you know, Archie Blier's company had Andy Williams. He had the Everly Brothers. I mean, somebody, you know, these were the cream of the crop. Atlantic obviously was selling albums, but companies weren't selling albums. And here we had, south of the border, about 100,000 records we sold, you know, within the first couple of months of the release of the record. You know, somebody by this time had picked a song of Herbie's to be a commercial called the T-Berry Shuffle, which is our song, was the Mexican Shuffle. You know, so there was all kinds of promotion going this way. You know, we were heading towards something. With Herbie's success, and that was a gigantic success, you know. it was a success that we could never have dreamed about. I mean, in the year of 1966, we outsold the Beatles. We sold over 13 million albums in America. Because all these albums we'd made, at one point Herbie had, I think, 5 albums in the top 20. The whole thing went. It wasn't just, we hit on a song called Taste of Honey, which was a huge hit as a single. But not only that, now you had Herb Alpert and the Tijuana Brass performing brilliantly. I mean, it all just happened. All the work that we put into it, those 3 or 4 years, built it up into the final payoff. And when the payoff came, we couldn't hold it back if we wanted to. I mean, you pick up a phone, you're selling 50,000 records a day. And everything else, all of a sudden they became interested in Chris Montez, and they became interested in the Baja Marimba Band, which is another side venture we came up with. And so all of a sudden we now had the wherewithal to really have a company, And I would say the first major artist we signed was Sergio Mendes in Brazil '66. And I heard about, I was a huge fan of, and by this time the music business changed dramatically. The Beatles came and they changed the world, And all of a sudden you had people producing their own music. I mean, it wasn't like the A&R guy made the record and, the singer heard the songs. And I mean, there were still things like that, but more and more it was more organic, And the music was getting to be fantastic. And music we cared about and loved and wanted to be part of, So in the summer of '63, the Jobim album was one of my favorite albums, still is, of all time, with Astrid Gilberto. And I loved Brazil '65, it was just incredible, bossa nova music. And as luck would have it, I was having breakfast with our Seattle distributor. And I was supposed to meet him at the Hyatt House, which is on Sunset Boulevard at the time, which was called briefly the Riot House, because a lot of rock bands stayed there and just tore it up. But and he saw me drive by in my car, and I was in my office, and he called me and he says, "Did you forget breakfast?" I said, "Oh my God, I'm sorry, I'll be right there." And at that breakfast, thank God he called me back, because he said, "By the way, Capitol let Sergio go, and they're doing a new band, and it's Brazil '66 now. He's got 2 new singers, and they're rehearsing at Jordi Hormel's." I said, "Well, where is that?" And he told me the address, and I called up there, can I come over? And I think I did. I think I brought Herb, and by this time Gil. We had now gotten Gil Friesen to join us in November of '64. And we all just fell in love with each other. It was just a fantastic thing. By that time, Sergio was signed as a keyboard player with Atlantic. And so Nestle Erdogan wanted him very much to sign this new band with Atlantic. So this was our first little competitive thing where we were actually competing with a company. And then Herbie said, "Look, not only will I produce you, but you'll come on the road with me." And Nestle, being the great guy that he was and a great friend of Sergio's to the end of his life, said, "Sergio, these people can do more for you than I can do. I would suggest you make that deal. But I will keep on recording you as a solo keyboard player." That's how much he thought of Sergio. And at the time, this was my first negotiation, really, because there was a lawyer, and he started asking me for things, and I said yes to everything. And at the time, we had hired an A&R guy who was knowledgeable in these things, but it didn't work out with this A&R guy. He was an A&R guy from the '50s, and here we were kind of in the mid-'60s. We hired him because we liked him and we appreciated his taste, but he didn't move like you got to move in the '60s, so to speak. It was more artist orientated, and you better get to know these people, and be part of them, And he looked at the deal I made, and he says, man, that's a crazy deal. I said, yeah, but they're going to sell 1 million records. I know we're going to sell 1 million records with these people. They're fantastic, And by this time, we had assembled, with the money we made, we assembled the kind of company we wanted. We bought the lot, the Chaplin lot on La Brea. We moved in there and we padlocked some of the buildings. We obviously couldn't use them, but we built up offices, and that was our home, And it was a great place to work, just a fantastic place. We closed the gate, and everybody inside that gate was A&M. It was just fantastic. So Sergio became a big star, and a big hit, and had 4 or 5 huge albums for the next 3-4 years. And Herbie and, I maybe sat in on a track or two. By this time, the business was growing to the point where I could no longer be in a studio. I had to be, the phone was ringing too much. I had to pretty much take care of business, So that's where we went. And, and then the rest of it is I went to Monterey in 67, and I heard all this great rock and roll music, and I felt embarrassed and upset because we didn't have any, and I decided we needed to get some. So we went out and got into the rock and roll business, and I think we did pretty good. Well, early on, I remember some of our first sessions, and Herbie would be directing the thing, and I'd sit there in the booth or something every once in a while and say, the guitar, I'm hearing more of a Dwayne Eddy thing here, And he said, well, go out and tell the guy. I said, I'm not a musician. He says, oh, no, this is your record. You're paying for it. Go tell him, rather than you tell me and I tell him, why don't you just explain to Tommy or whomever it is what you think you're hearing here. He'll listen to you, And after doing that a few times and feeling sort of good about it, and realizing that I was getting through, that it wasn't that difficult, in fact, as long as I paid him the respect I knew he deserved, because we always use great players, I sort of got to sort of understand musicians a little bit, and having the support of my partner was paramount in this, because we were like one, 1 and 1 equaled 9, so whatever I did, I had his support, and likewise, whatever he did, he had mine. And all the years at A&M, whatever each of us wanted to do, we did, and he wanted to make a symphonic album about whatever, man, go for it, man, fantastic, go, I'm with it, I don't care what it costs, go for it, have some fun, and it was, I'm taking 2 months off in the summer. Good, enjoy yourself, great, So it was never, ever like anybody's concerned over each other. We were, as a partnership, how do we say this without sounding, kind of ridiculous? But we were kind of uncorruptible. Is that a word, or is it incorruptible? It's a good word. So first of all, we were never going to do anything to blow what we had. We were having too much fun, and we realized we were good at what we were doing. We were going to come at this business with respect for it and honor people as they honored us, And, Jimmy Iovine, told me recently that we changed the business because we treated artists better than anybody else did. And that everybody eventually had to change and get busy treating artists better, And it didn't, I was never really conscious of anything like that. You came on our lot, you were part of us, So we gave offices to people, we gave, we had, in our production department, people helped artists, new artists came in, we had people there to help them get through stuff. We wanted to always make that first recording session fun, make it right, make it that you want to keep on making records. don't make it hard. Don't put restrictions on people. Don't give them jobs to do that they're not good at. Get to know who you're signing and get to work with them. Work with them to make sure they feel good about the record they're putting out. If they don't feel good about it, it doesn't make any sense. So I think it all stemmed from the connection I had with Herbie and the fact that we wanted to treat people right, because we couldn't otherwise compete with the big companies now. We didn't have their bankrolls, and other companies started after years picking up our people. Virgin Records eventually started with two guys that worked for us. Jeff and Jordan. A lot of guys just, and it made us, how do we keep people? And eventually we kept people by giving them some stock in the company, by treating them better than anybody else. And if we had a big year, you share. If we had and record companies to this day can't really predict or can't really project anything. It's kind of silly in a way to project, because that means that you have to convince an artist to release a certain album within a certain quarter so it'll benefit sales, so you can report this on that. That's ridiculous. We never had those kind of, we didn't care. We owned the company. We could do whatever we wanted, So the point is, if you had those kind of windfall years, where you had a record like a Janet Jackson record or a Peter Frampton record, or, that sold incredible amounts of records, Supertramp, enormously successful records, Police, all these kind of things, Styx, that if there was a windfall, you got a piece of it, you got it. Plus, we gave you the greatest place in the world to work, we thought, anyway. So that's how we competed. It was our treatment of people and our essence, so to speak, that made us different. And that's what we wanted to be. We wanted to be different. Well, Almo Records, Almo Sounds, was, started in like 95, 96, because, after we'd sold A&M, and we sold to a company that we got along with very well. The company was Polygram at the time, and we didn't shop A&M. Polygram made a point of wanting to acquire us. We figured out what the price tag was. We got somebody really good to negotiate for us, and we felt if they would pay that price, we would sell our company. And primarily they liked us. They liked Herbie and I, because they wanted us to run and continue to make A&M prosper. And at the time we sold it to make it bigger, because by that time, I'm talking 89, and in 1990, artists were getting huge advances, which they deserved, and we just didn't have that kind of money to give somebody 60 million, guarantee 60 million bucks or 40 million, or, we lost Janet Jackson because Virgin gave her 12 million, and we just didn't have that kind of money around to put into one artist, you know what I'm saying? So, and also the way we got a lot of our financing was through international licensing. In other words, in the 70s, I could go to CBS Europe and get a deal for maybe 20 million bucks for 3 years, or maybe 40 million just for rent, and for the A&M label to be distributed throughout Europe for that period of time, and it was successful for both of us. They weren't doing those kind of deals any longer. That kind of money wasn't around, because what it amounted to is they didn't want to basically support a competitor, as we were by this time. So we sort of had to sell the company, in a sense, to make it grow. And I'd gotten along very well with David Fine, who was the president of Polygram. And we had a pretty decent first year. I tried to make some changes in the company and streamline it somehow. And then, lo and behold, which is something I didn't realize, and that at that company at that time, when you were the age of 61, you were automatically retired. And so this friend I had, this rapport I had with this fellow David Fine, was all of a sudden it was over because he was 61, and all of a sudden he was on boards and operating for them in a very different way. And all of a sudden I was faced with a guy that wasn't into it, really. Wasn't into the A&M dream, wasn't into who we were, and certainly didn't like me very much, for what it's worth, which I just could never quite understand, even though, you know, sometimes you make it and sometimes you don't. David was, as I say, retired, and then we were, you know, kind of paid off, basically. Herbie and I were paid off. And in the middle of '93, we had to leave A&M, you know. And as I say, it was not something we were looking forward to or we had thought was going to happen. We thought, you know, at the time I was, let me see, I was in my 50s, you know, still, and still digging and liking music, you know. I mean, this is what, and part of the deal was also that I couldn't hire anybody if I were to begin again. I couldn't hire anybody that worked for A&M or Polygram for like 5 years. All right. Now, at the time, I was pretty disgusted with everything, and I didn't think I was ever going to get back into it. And then I left, and I had a really difficult year. I had aside from leaving A&M, I was diagnosed with prostate cancer, and my mother was dying, and, you know, it was just a really, really, and my wife and I were in the middle of redoing our house, you know, which can just be, we were entering our third year or something at this thing, and we got the flu, you know, it was just awful, you know, just one of those amazing, terrible years, which ended, of course, with the earthquake of '94, you know, where we just almost got thrown out of our house completely, the place we were living in. And, you know, so after the prostate cancer surgery, I went to Hawaii, and, you know, as I was healing, you know, I just sort of felt I missed the business. You know, this was my anchor. This is what I did for 30 years. You know, this is what I liked to do. And so I decided to do it again, you know, and Herbie went along with me, of course. He wasn't as enthusiastic as I was. He felt the business had changed a little bit, and he was probably smarter than I was, you know. But I felt I wanted to do this, you know, and found a couple of A&R people that by chance had not worked for A&M or Polygram I could get along with. And we invested our own money again into this thing. And by this time I was looking for help, primarily because I didn't want to spend Herbie's money, because I knew he wasn't that enthusiastic over this thing, you know. And deals were not that easy to come by, you know. Things were different. But, you know, one of the first acts we signed was a band called Garbage, and at the time they were not really going to tour, and they were mostly producers, but they were very talented, and the girl was really, really unique. And first album was a bit of a sensation, you know. So here we were back doing stuff, you know. But the game had changed dramatically. I didn't really see myself working as I did at A&M. You know, I was sort of a dilettante. You know, I could work a whole day and then maybe take off the next day, or work a whole day and then take a break and go to the racetrack, and where I really loved being as well, you know. And I found it difficult to maintain a staff, and things were just different, you know. And it gave us a sort of an idea of what the music business was coming to be. And Herb and I both felt that it might be the time to maybe close down Almo, and perhaps maybe even sell Rondor, which was our publishing company. And that's what we did in like the year 2000. So Almo Sound still sells records, of the artists that we had. That would have been Ozo Motley, that would have been Imogen Heap, that would have been, we put out a pretty good, a couple of garbage records, some other records that we put out 3 Herb Alpert albums that were pretty good, including one called Second Wind that I think was a great album. So we did release, I would say, about 16, 17 albums, in its time. And we're still selling those, but we're not making new ones, so to speak. And I have a pretty good relationship with Jimmy Iovine at Interscope, so we're still distributed by them, so we have first-class distribution, so this catalog is getting respected, so to speak, You look for signposts, and I think in any kind of career, you look at the opportunities presented to you. A lot of people can't define those maybe as clearly as we could have. Some people have opportunities that are knocking them over and they can't see it. I see life as a series of choices, and it's a question of what choice you make at that particular time. Is it going to make you? Is it going to break you? Is it going to be successful? Is it going to be life-changing? Or is it just going to be fun? And how do you want to live your life, So when it came to, I got into racing because Nate Duroff, that guy that lent me the $35,000 to start our business, wanted me to claim a horse with him. Now claiming horses is a long explanation, but it's part of the card, in a racing card. There's always claiming races, and horses are for sale. So you have different values of horse racing by virtue of the claiming status. Anyway, I said, Nate, I'm busy. I'm in the record business. I'm fine. I like going to the track once a year, but come on, I'm busy. Anyway, fade into next scene, Nate has a slight stroke. He's in the hospital. I go with a balloon and visit him, and is there anything I can do for you? As you say every time you're visiting somebody in the hospital. His answer, yeah, when I get out of here, you're going to claim a horse with me. So sure enough, I think in 1970, as Herb and me and Nate at the racetrack, a horse called Angel Tune that we claimed for $12,500, is running in the third race, and he's running for 20 grand, I think he came in third at 15, so we put him in a $20,000 race, and he wins. She wins. And so therefore, we now know all there is to know about the racing business, Now, we went on with it for a while, and then somehow we got a little disinterested along the way because we ended up spending more money than we thought we were going to spend. And not that anybody, misused us or, it just, we got talked into buying an expensive horse, and we did, knowing full well that there could be problems with this horse. Anyway, long story short, we didn't do it for a while. And then I realized I missed it. I missed the diversion of it. I like sports. I enjoy a contest, And then I felt I better be with somebody I think is doing pretty well in the game, and this is where you bet on people. And I got Burt Bacharach to, I think around 1978, to introduce me to Bobby Frankel, who's a currently Hall of Fame trainer, And with Bobby, we had about 10 years of, we had some good horses together. And he was a very interesting trainer, and I learned a lot about the business from him, So it was through the record, it's through one thing that you go to another thing, and there's a bunch of passages we make here, and the record, the horse business has been fun, and I'm having to sit here and tell you I'm thrilled to have bred and raced the Kentucky Derby winner of 2005. Unbelievable achievement, incredible. And my wife and I still wake up in the morning and say we won the Derby. It's an absolutely incredible experience. But it all built itself into something. It took me 30 years to get to the Kentucky Derby, So you sort of had to be patient, and we were sort of having fun at the level we were playing, and all of a sudden we found ourselves at another level. And we were prepared for it, with the right trainer, the right racing manager, who we've now had for 20, 25 years, and we're seen to be having a good time. Evaluate your associations. Very important. If somebody just seems a bit off, if you feel that you're not on the same page, it just isn't worth it. But once you agree to be part of something, then do it 110%. Don't hold back. Give it everything you got. And I mean, be aware of what's out there, It's so many opportunities. I mean, and today with obviously the web, my God, people do things by themselves. You don't even need companies anymore. So the individual today, I mean, this is what this technology means to me, is that the individual is more powerful now than he's ever been before, So, I mean, anything's really possible. Anything and everything is possible. But, and also I think you got till you're 30 before you have to make any real critical decisions in your life. And I think you should use that time from the time you're out of school to you're working your profession and trying different things out before you have to make a critical decision about what you're going to do with your life. But by the time you're 30, I think you should know where you are. And once you know that, then give that all you got. But in the meantime, have a lot of fun. Make sure you get fun. It shouldn't be without fun. That's for sure. And make your brand. Make people know who you are. The greatest. Met the greatest people. Fantastic shows. Amazing recordings. Every once in a while a record would come through us and Herbie would look at me and say, what did we do to deserve this, That this amazing thing is going to come out on our label, Incredible, So we had the greatest time, and it is still a great business. I mean, the music is still out there, and people are making great music. It's just, I guess we just have to catch up to the technology, but the music is still amazing. So I would recommend a career in the music business. If you're 23 and you got the energy, it's fantastic.